Hello friends, for today's video we are looking at part 4 of our top 50 fantasy books of the last 5 years, and for today specifically we're zeroing in on the year of 2023. Because this is part 4, we are going to have a reflection of the tier ranking that we've been doing along the way from 2020 up through 2022, and for today this is where the 2023 installments are going to be added to it. If you're interested in parts 1 through 3, I'll have them linked. I am going to be continuing what I've been doing throughout this video series, which is also talk about the grieving process and be really open and honest about what that's been like and how it's coincided with the books that have come out, how certain books maybe resonated with me or didn't resonate with me, or what it's been like to be kind of online as my job while also having something difficult go on behind the scenes. If you are a little confused though about the reasons why I'm talking about this in relation to this tier ranking, I do go more in depth in those first 3 parts, but for those of you that have been following along with this video series, I just want to jump straight into it for today. We left off in 2022 where I was talking about, I was obviously still in the process of grieving the loss of my father that had occurred in 2020, and then in 2022 my grandmother's health was starting to decline, and for 2023 unfortunately that is when my grandmother did pass away, and it was of course really, really tragic. I think it was also difficult because for my father, he, for his age, everybody that met him was always like, your dad's gonna live to be 100. Your dad is so active and he's always moving and he's always doing stuff, and he took good care of himself. And the older he got, the more that he tried to take care of himself. And I would say the healthier he was becoming in a lot of ways, which is part of why what happened with his health was so it took me aback, because he was somebody who was very much mindful of what he ate, and he moved all the time, and he drank tons of water. You know, he did all the things you're supposed to do. He was in his 70s when he passed away, but again, everybody that met him was like, your dad's gonna live to be, over 100. He's just in such great shape. And when my dad's health started to decline, it was, of course, in the middle of the pandemic. And at first, nobody knew what was going on, but then it was advised that he get surgery. He got surgery, and then all of a sudden he started to have a lot of other problems. And because of the fact that it was a global pandemic and the healthcare industry was overwhelmed, I definitely don't think that people were really listening when I was trying to explain all the health things that he is having happen right now since his surgery were not occurring before the surgery. And they just kept telling me he's getting older. This is just what happens when you are older, congestive heart failure. And everybody just kept saying these things. And I'm like, it was only after the surgery, something happened in this surgery. And then I kept having to take him back to the hospital. And they kept telling me either he's fine, actually, which was bizarre, because if you saw him, you're like, that man is not fine. When he wasn't doing well, it was very clear. But they would either say, because they would just be looking at charts, like, oh no, he's fine. He's fine. I have high hopes that he's going to turn around any day now, and that he's going to have it. And they would say things like that. Or they would look at him and be like, well, he's going to die soon. And it was this bizarre back and forth where it felt like nobody was actually looking at him and trying to assess and actually figure out what was going wrong. And it felt like nobody was listening to me. And within the course of about 5 months, he went from being quite healthy, especially for his age, to dying. He got to a point where he weighed less than I do. I'm pretty short. I'm a little under 5'4", but my dad used to be 6'1". He got smaller as he got older, of course, like a lot of us do. But he got so extremely thin. He just wasn't doing well at all. So it was like this rapid, sudden decrease in his health, and then it felt like it was really, really, really long when you're in the thick of it, and then at the same time you're like, I can't believe 5 months ago he was fine. What's going on? And then there's the shock of it all. So it happened very rapidly, even though it didn't feel like it, since I was his caretaker and I was with him every single day, and it's a lot when you're taking care of somebody. But with my grandmother, it was kind of a much slower, we'd been seeing for a while that her memory wasn't quite what it was, and she was older, we recognize that even though she's a pretty healthy older lady, that this is just part of life, is death, and that she is getting older and things happen. So it was a much slower process to watch, but at the same time, it's not like one is better or worse than the other. They are both very challenging in their own ways. One of them is more of a shock, and then the other one is more of it's like you're grieving and mourning throughout the process because it is slower and you're seeing it happen. And in the case of my dad, I mean, I had people telling me, like, I had a doctor tell me the day before he died that my dad was fine. And with my grandma, it's very different because nobody is improperly assessing. With my dad, they never figured it out, and with my grandma, it was very clear what was happening. So there is kind of this slower acceptance of things as they're occurring. You're less in the dark, but it is still very challenging. If anybody has had family members who have had dementia, it's not easy, especially because in the case of my grandma, my mom was the one, in the same way I cared for my dad. My mom was caring for her mom. And as my mom's daughter, who loved my grandma and was with her often in my childhood and thought she was just great, you care about all these family members. And I wanted to be there for my mom as she's trying to be there for her mom. And it's just challenging in its own way because when I lost my dad, it was like the only person I have to take care of in my grief is myself, so to speak. With my grandma, it's the loss of her, but also I know that it's really hitting my mom. And it's interesting because I lost a parent before my mom lost a parent too. So it's odd to be the child who has experienced that before the parent. But I do feel like, I mean, I'm not trying to diminish the difficulty of it, but in a way, I think my mom, what I was describing before about you kind of are slowly accepting as they're still alive. I think that helped my mom. It didn't make it any less difficult when she passed away. I think for anybody that's watched loved ones whose health is declining, you feel almost like you're not supposed to say that there's a sense of relief also because they're finally not suffering anymore, but that is a part of it too. So my mom had a lot of those mixed feelings, and we kind of, I think we tried to get through it together, and we were kind of in it together. And grief can feel very isolating, but in a way, even though it was really difficult to lose two people that I loved very dearly, who were also very who were also very pivotal in my childhood, because my grandma would hang out with me all the time. I think that even though it's really challenging to lose those people that you love, when you lose somebody that's really, really important to someone else also, it kind of makes the grief feel less isolating and you feel less alone. And there is this sort of understanding, and it's hard to describe without trying to be like, I'm in this depressing club of people who have lost people that I loved a lot. But there is something to when you meet somebody, then there's like this quiet, absolute understanding without really having to elaborate. Like, oh, I know this person knows what I'm describing or what I've gone through, and I know this person is going to be able to give me grace from a place of experience that other people don't quite always understand or relate to, or maybe they're really trying, but they don't necessarily have it fully understood. They don't have a full grasp on it because they've not experienced it yet. So as usual in talking about all of this, it's a way to be honest about the grieving process because it's a challenge and it's so different from person to person, and what brought about the loss of a loved one can contribute to the differences in the grief. But at the end of the day, I don't know that I feel like grief is talked about as much as it could be, especially on social media or YouTube or whatever the case may be. And I hope that in hearing all of this, it really helps other people who have either experienced it themselves, have yet to experience it, but maybe they feel like, oh, I feel like I have a better understanding now. Or if a loved one of yours is going through it, maybe it illuminates a little bit stronger what it's like for them. Because also sometimes it's hard for people when they're in the thick of it to express what they're feeling and what it's like and what they need. So hopefully in hearing about all of these things, it maybe just reminds us that we just don't know what other people are going through. And even when somebody seems fine, and would even describe themselves as fine, they're still experiencing something that is very unlike anything else, really. So Now, on the bright side, as always, I like to balance out the kind of sad topic with something a little bit more uplifting. And so this is where I like to mention a charity that I think in some way relates to the people that I have lost. In this case, now we are kind of talking about both my father and my grandmother. So I wanted to mention a charity that I felt like in some ways represented them a little bit. A reminder that the previous 3 charities we mentioned in parts 1, 2, and 3, we had the Phoenix Children's Hospital, World Wildlife Fund, as well as Doctors Without Borders. Those will still be linked in the description bar. The new one that I wanted to mention today is called A New Leaf, and it's described as helping families and individuals overcome the challenges of homelessness, domestic violence, and more. And I felt like this one represented both my dad and my grandma very well, and that my grandma was somebody who all she wanted was to ensure basically that her grandkids had a nice place to live. That's all she wanted. My grandma all the time. She always liked to get her little scratchers. She liked to play the lottery, and she was always hoping she'd make it big so that she could pay for all her grandkids to go to school and so that she could buy houses for all of us, which didn't happen, but it was a very sweet dream. And my grandma was the stereotypical sweet old lady who all she wanted was for you to feel cozy and comfy and to be well fed. That is what my grandma, just to a T. She was such a grandma. She loved babies also. And I think my grandma was very sympathetic to other people and families. If I'm not mistaken, had 7 sisters, or she was one of 7 girls, and then she had 2 brothers. But she was always helping her sisters. She was always caring for them. She was an immigrant from Cuba, and I think absolutely there was this emphasis on caring for your family members and being there for them. And I also think a fun result of this is that my grandma never lost her accent. And none of us can ever, in my family, anytime we would talk like my grandma would talk as like a fun way of impersonating her or whatever, we could never do it. None of us could ever get my grandma's accent down. But she was just adorable and cared very much for families. And I definitely feel like this kind of a charity that's doing what they can to help families, I feel like that's something that if my grandma had the means, that's absolutely what she would have been doing. And then also with my dad, because this helps care for families who are also experiencing homelessness, he was somebody who experienced homelessness throughout his childhood. I've mentioned before he grew up in extreme poverty here in Arizona where it's incredibly hot. My dad did work in cotton fields and worked on farms from the time he was a small child, and he lived in abandoned railroad cars and in abandoned hay barns, and he did not have an easy childhood. He developed skin cancer at a young age because of all the time he spent outside and in the elements, and I definitely think that my dad would have felt really strongly about just trying to help somebody who, you never know, just a little tiny bit of help can go such a long way. So I'll have this charity, A New Leaf, as a reminder, that's what it's called. I'll have this charity and the other charities linked in the description bar. If you have the means, even if it's just $1 or $5, if you have the means to donate kind of in honor of these 2 wonderful people that were a big part of my life, it would mean a lot. Or if you can check out the charities or share them, that would mean a lot too. But anyway, on that note, let's finally jump into some of the books from 2023. And one of the things that I've been doing consistently throughout this video series is I've had a poll over on my community tab, and I ask all of you just to kind of gain a little bit more insight into your tastes and to get a feel for what works for you and what doesn't. I like to have a poll of 4 of the books from each given year. And I think this year is the one that I am in the most disagreement with all of you on. In the previous ones, I'm like, either I can kind of see it, but maybe I don't feel the same, or I feel exactly the same. This year, I'm like, no. But that's what's fun about having these kinds of discussions. It's fun to just see how different our tastes are. And I would love to do polls with more entries than just 4. But unfortunately, the community tab only lets you have 4. So the 4 that were on the community tab's poll were Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, The Will of the Many, and The Fragile Threads of Power. Now, the actual numbers, which I'll have it on the screen, but in case you are driving or doing something you can't exactly look and you're just listening, the results, we had 32% for Trust of the Emerald Sea, 23% for Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, 39% for The Will of the Many, and for Fragile Threads of Power, we had 6%. Now, I do want to allow for, I know every single time some people will mention, oh, I've only read one of these, or I've only read a couple of these. And sometimes even if you've only read a couple, it's actually a tough decision for you to decide which one to vote for. And because of that, I am curious if Fragile Threads of Power, given that it is part of a continuation series, if maybe that's contributing to why the number is so much lower, because if you haven't read all of Shades of Magic, then you're probably not going to jump into that one. Maybe you didn't like Shades of Magic, so you didn't bother giving Fragile Threads of Power a chance or something like that. So it kind of feels like it's either you can think of it as it is a continuation where you should read the first ones first, or you can think of it as a separate thing, but if you didn't like the other thing, then you would assume like, oh, I wouldn't like this. Regardless, it just kind of feels like it's a further entry into a series. But I can't tell if that's part of it or if really that many people just don't care for Fragile Threads of Power. But I liked Fragile Threads of Power quite a bit. I thought it was great. I'm a big fan of V.E. Schwab's writing. There are very few things that I've read by V.E. Schwab that haven't been standouts for me in some fashion. I recently read The Near Witch, and that's probably one of the only ones that I thought was just fine, but that's because it was also the first thing she ever wrote, and it wasn't, I don't know if she had ever really intended for it to be published until later when she did start having a career, and then it kind of was like, what's the first thing you ever wrote? It was one of those sort of situations. But otherwise, I like most things by V.E. Schwab. Regardless, though, Tress and The Will of the Many, them being the ones that are higher, and then the other two being the ones that are lower, for my taste, I would reverse it. And I like all of these, actually, so it's not that I'm saying I think some of them are exceptional and other ones are trash. But I definitely think that Fragile Threads of Power and Encyclopedia Fairies, I quite enjoyed those ones. And then with the other two, with Tress was fun. I kind of sometimes feel like Tress feels more middle grade, which is fine. It's not like, oh, it's middle grade, so therefore it's not as good. I don't mean it like that. I just mean it has this very youthful, fun, silly feeling to it, but with Sanderson's signature world-building flair. And it was fun, and I recognize that it's kind of a play on The Princess Bride, and it is definitely a fun adventure story, but I don't know if I found that it sat with me. The Will of the Many, there's so many things about this that I feel like there's a lot of potential for me to really like this series. In the first book, however, I definitely feel like it feels very similar to a lot of other stories, and the main character is a Gary Sue to a point where it made a lot of scenes. It took away pretty much all the stakes and a lot of what would typically be heightened emotions, because you're thinking, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know what our main character is going to do. And a little bit for a lot of The Will of the Many, I was like, well, he's going to win. And whatever he's doing, he's going to win. He's going to somehow be the best, even though these other people are supposedly so skilled. And that kind of happened over and over again. So The Will of the Many, though, has so much to it that I think is so cool. And the concept that I was the most sucked in by and pulled into was the idea of people's will literally being extracted as a form almost of taxes. And the way that most people just give a little bit of their will and then they can function throughout society. And then there are people who end up having more control of it and they have more say in what happens in society. And then there are those that have their will continuously extracted. And there's this question of how much are you a part of a system bigger than you, and you're playing a role in it, and how much are we all kind of collectively complicit. And I really, really liked that concept, and I really wanted to explore those themes more. But in the first book, we don't explore it as much. And that's why I say I'm waiting to see what happens in the rest of the series, because I think there's so much potential there. But within the first book itself, it definitely feels like it's laying the foundation. And also, our main character is a Gary Sue. I'm still continuously surprised, because I thought Mary Sue's Gary Sue's maybe irritated people more. But I think I was more surprised when the book first came out. Since then, since 2023, I have seen how much people love this book, so it doesn't surprise me that it won this poll. I am just surprised that the Gary Sue part of things didn't really irk too many people, it would seem. But officially getting into the tier ranking itself, I probably won't go all that in depth with those ones when I get around to them, because I just elaborated on them just now. And also, for part 5, I will line up all of the polls so we can kind of compare how it looks across the board. I think that'll be fun to see. But jumping into it, I don't have anything in the bottom tier. We don't have anything in tier 6 for today, so that's good. Do have a couple things in tier 5, though. And almost never do I let myself put things on tier rankings that I have DNF'd, because I don't necessarily feel like it makes sense to weigh in on a story that I didn't complete. But there have been a couple of books over the course of the 50 that we'll be going through by the time we get to the end of part 5 that I am including, either because I read a fair amount of it and I still feel like maybe there's some things to say, or because there were things about the beginning that, writing style wise, or the way that the story was being told, like, they just didn't really work for me, and so I still wanted to mention them. So that's going to be true of a couple today, and I recognize that that's not to everybody's liking to have books that you DNF'd included, but I will mention a couple of them. 2 that I completed, and I'll start with those. We have June Farrow and Starling House. These are in tier 5, mostly because I didn't hate them. Actually, nothing on any of these did I thoroughly despise or anything like that. None of these books prompted really long rants or anything like that. But for these 2, I read them, and you know when you finish a book and you just have hardly anything to say about it? You don't really feel anything about it. You weren't upset by it, but you also weren't moved by it really at any point. You just read it and you're like, I read that, I guess. And you feel like that as soon as you finish the book. That's kind of what I felt about June Farrow and Starling House. I would absolutely read other things by both of these authors. I have read other things, but these books didn't deter me from picking other things up by any means. I just didn't really feel basically anything when I read them, even though I thought that they had, especially Starling House, I thought there were some themes within Starling House that I thought were interesting. The idea of kind of almost generational grapevine, I'll call it, or generational telephone. This idea that stories shift and change, or right from the beginning were told a certain way for a certain narrative, and then they have just been believed continuously, and it's never really been challenged. But then when you actually hear the truth, it sort of transforms the way that you view something, the way you think about certain things or certain people. So I liked that concept, but the execution for me, I actually wish we had a little bit more set in that idea. I think that the majority of the book wasn't as rooted in that as I was hoping it would be. And then with June Farrow, I mean, it's kind of it's not quite portal fantasy, but kind of. It's almost like time travel. And there is this character finding out when they time travel that supposedly they've lived in this other place for a long time. And they have people that care about them and they don't know it. And they're kind of getting wrapped up in all of this. And it was fine. It could have been compelling. It could have been really interesting. And I just didn't really quite resonate with it or connect with it, which is a consistent thing with this author's works, and I keep waiting for the day that I find a book by this author that works for me, because I feel like that book exists. I think there is going to be something by this author that I'll really like, and I just haven't found it yet. I did do a whole video over on Patreon dedicated to authors whose books I keep trying and they keep not working, and I keep trying and I still haven't found something, and I feel like I should. So if you're interested in that, I'll have my Patreon linked. It should be up high on the Patreon in case you want to not have to search for it. It will be linked pretty easily. And then the one that I DNF'd that's in this tier would be The Witch King by Martha Wells. I was really, really excited when I started this because I thought, oh, this is really cool and the world building is so interesting, but you definitely are kind of in the dark. And so you're waiting for, okay, I'm gonna be a little in the dark for a while, but then slowly things are going to start to unfold and I'm going to have reveals. And oddly, the further in I got, the more convoluted it was getting and the less I cared, which is why it's in this tier. And again, completely understand if you have thoughts as to the choice for putting something in a tier ranking that I haven't completed, but I just felt like it was such a cool concept. And then the way that we were telling the story, I appreciate approaching stories differently or playing around with timeline or things like that. But it kind of was doing that, okay, now let's do flashbacks. And that's sometimes used in a way that I think actually allows for you to get to know a character better and to care. But other times it just feels like, could we have incorporated this into present day and not formally set them apart, because when you do set them apart, it kind of can interrupt the pacing, and it can interrupt the present day conflict, and it also can interrupt the world building and the reader getting further into this place that you've created. And I kind of felt like that was the effect with The Witch King. Now for tier 4, only one book for today, and it is the only other one that I DNF'd, and that would be Swordcatcher. But I did read the majority of this book. I had very little left. It's a long book. I had very little left. And I just kind of kept feeling like this book felt like it was combining pieces of a lot of other books and characters from a lot of other books. In fact, I actually felt like aspects of this book were strangely similar to Shades of Magic, which was funny because one of the characters was even named Kel. And I was like, it's not only similar in the dynamics between two of these characters and the way that they interact with each other, but also is the same name. Anyway, so there were some similarities that felt like Shades of Magic, and some other books as well. And I don't mind when certain books feel like a fusion of a lot of other stories, but sometimes if it feels like a fusion, I want it to then, the end result to feel like it's its own unique thing, or for the end result to be, it feels like a lot of these other things, but it doesn't feel too much like any one thing. And with Swordcatcher, it felt like it was a fusion of a lot of things that ultimately I just kind of kept being like, I'd rather go reread Shades of Magic. So I guess if it's going to remind me of something else, I don't want to then be left wishing I was reading the other thing. And that's kind of how I felt. And it also, I don't know, maybe this is a Cassandra Clare thing that persists throughout her books. I don't know, because I haven't read too many of them. I read the first one in Shadowhunters way back when I was in high school, and I don't remember it except for it had the, is this my sister or is it not my sister? Because I love them, so I would like to figure that out. It had that trope. And then this year I read the first book in the Infernal Devices, and I actually did think that was quite fun, but I've heard the best is yet to come, so I do plan to continue with that trilogy. But it kind of seems like there's this anybody could end up with anybody, everybody has chemistry feeling in Swordcatcher that I'm wondering, is that present in a lot of Cassandra Clare books? And I'm not opposed to that necessarily. It reminds me of this series I read years ago, the Falling Kingdom series by Morgan Rhodes, I believe is the name of the author. And that series kind of had that too, where characters would meet and you're like, I guess they have chemistry. And then other characters would meet and you're like, oh, they have chemistry too. And that's kind of what Swordcatcher reminded me of. Anyway, but I was like, I don't care who ends up with who. I don't really care about this premise. I don't have that much left, and I just, I could just start reading something else. I don't care what happens. But I didn't dislike it. I obviously read through the majority of the book for a reason. But I didn't ultimately care that much, so that's why it's in tier 4. Now, tier 3. I have kind of a line where 4 through 6, those tiers, those are books where they didn't really work for me necessarily, or maybe they're not the most memorable or the most impactful. But if it's in tier 4, typically, even if it's a book that I didn't love, if it's the first in a series, there's a chance I might continue on with it. Once we get past that into tier 3, it's I'm definitely going to keep going with this. And also, to put it in kind of a consumerist kind of way, if I own a physical copy, I'm going to keep the physical copy. I think that's a decent way to describe it. So, within this tier, we have The Will of the Many and Tress of the Emerald Sea. So I think that establishes pretty well, like, I did like these books. I know I already talked about them a little bit. I did like these books. I enjoyed these books. They're not currently the ones that have hit me the hardest, impacted me the most, or that I think are the absolute most original, unique, mind-blowing thing I've ever picked up. But there's a lot to them that I enjoyed. I had a good time with them, and if they're part of a series, which The Will of the Many is, I'm definitely going to keep going. Tress, it's like, I would read something else in this fashion by Sanderson. So I enjoyed these books. They're just not necessarily breaking into all-time favorites. For tier 2, we have a few different things. So we have some books that were mentioned in the poll, but we have some others as well. So I'll go ahead and start with the ones that were not in the poll. We have Last Tale of the Flower Bride. This is a story that is playing off of the framework of fairy tales, and I would say especially leaning into kind of grim fairy tale feelings. However, it's taking those and it's doing something that I actually think is similar to Pan's Labyrinth, if you've seen Pan's Labyrinth, which is this reality or is this a coping mechanism, and thus it's not reality at all. And I really appreciated that feeling that this book established, and the way that it utilized this almost magical realism to grapple with a lot of the trauma that characters in the story have experienced. Now, the reason it's not top tier, even though I like those concepts a lot, is because I don't know that in this particular story I felt all that connected to the characters. And the fact that, as a character-driven reader, it still ranked as high as it did, despite the fact that I didn't necessarily connect with the characters that much, really speaks to how much I feel like those other things were done quite exceptionally and quite well. Then we have The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi. So I'm so sad because the sequel was supposed to come out this year, and it's been postponed. But this is just pure fun action-adventure fantasy. And those don't typically rank as high for me because I usually like a little more oomph in my stories, a little more depth. I usually like to have a lot more of an emotional connection with the story. However, sometimes you just have certain books that do whatever their subgenre is, it does it so well that you're like, I just had such a great time with that story. And I feel like The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi definitely did that. Plus, the world building is really cool, and it was cool to have a protagonist that's very different from a lot of our other protagonists. And for that reason, I really, really enjoyed it, and that's why it's in tier 2. We also have Bookshops and Bone Dust, and the same concepts where I feel like cozy fantasy, but I've worded it before as like fantasy forward cozy fantasy, where it doesn't necessarily feel like contemporary fiction, doesn't necessarily feel like contemporary romance. It just kind of feels like it's fantasy and cozy, which, duh, that's cozy fantasy. But cozy fantasy almost feels like it has its own subgenres. And this one is a little more fantasy heavy, and I just feel like it does cozy fantasy that is fantasy heavy really, really well. And I thought it was very sweet, very lovely, and I have enjoyed both these books by Travis Baldree, and I'm excited for the third one that is going to be coming out. I didn't even know there was a third one for a while, and then when I saw it I was like, does anybody else know this is happening? I'm very excited because it's been really fun to kind of continuously come back to these cozy fantasy books. And then we have Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. The first one was my favorite in the trilogy, so it does rank a little bit on the high end. If you were to ask me my feelings about the trilogy as a whole, I don't know if it'd be quite as high, but this first book was just so fun. I really liked the way that we had this academic who is studying the Fae, and the Fae are rooted in folklore, and thus they have a lot of what we like in our fantasy stories, kind of the world-building elements that feel like they are lore oriented, and we have that, but we have somebody that's very determined to learn more about them. It was kind of a natural vehicle for exploration in the story, which I thought was really fun. Plus, I liked her main character, and I liked some of the other characters in this one as well. There's a little bit of found family in it too. And then last for today, the only one in top tier, we have Fragile Threads of Power. So when I said the poll was very different for all of you than it was for me, Fragile Threads of Power was my favorite thing on that list. It takes a while to get going because it's kind of working through the trauma for characters that were in Shades of Magic, and then once it kind of goes from that into this new deadly set of stakes, I just felt like it was race to the finish line. But because we had that slower beginning, I really cared about what was happening. It was action packed. It had a lot of character exploration and a lot of introspection for the characters. We're really looking at the consequences of if you are somebody who survived conflict. And there's a lot of mysteries in this, and we're expanding the world that we got in Shades of Magic. And if you've read Shades of Magic, you know there are certain things where you're like, I think there's more to this world. I think there's more to this magic. And we're starting to expand that in Fragile Threads of Power, which I thought was a lot of fun. I liked the way that the new characters were introduced. I liked the way everybody's plot lines wove together. I just was gripped by it pretty much from the very beginning, and I can't wait for when we finally get the sequel to that. It'll be so much fun. It is not necessarily as high ranking as some of the other ones in this top tier, but I still greatly, greatly enjoyed it. So that's it for our look at the year of 2023, and we only have 1 year left for this top 50 fantasy of the last 5 years. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how all of this concludes. Like I said, I'll have, of course, the tier ranking will continue to move from where we started to now, and then also we'll look at all the polls ranked against each other. I think that'll be kind of fun. And then maybe I'll do a poll where I have all of the top books. Well, man, this is why YouTube needs to let you have 5 books instead of, or not just 5 books, 5 entries. It doesn't have to be books, but this is why they should let you do more than 4, because I wanted to put the ones that were the top from each of the polls against each other, and then we could have a winner of what was your top book from the last 5 years. It's obviously not the most seamless, perfect way to determine that, but it would be kind of a fun way to pit the books against each other and just kind of see which one wins. Maybe I'll do that for the first 4, or maybe whichever one had the biggest amount of a lead in the polls. Maybe I'll put those against each other. We'll see. It'll be fun though. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and if you are interested, please give those charities a look, and if you can donate, feel free to do so. I think that would be wonderful. They're all for good causes. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.